good morning to everybody. I am going to briefly introduce myself and then we start with the presentation. I am Giulia Benati. I am an environmental engineer and I am specialized in sustainable urban planning. So after having worked both in the private and public sectors in Italy and abroad, I am now starting a PhD at the University La Sapienza of Rome in economic geography. And today I am going to give a presentation on environmental law. So let's dive into the presentation. So we are talking today about the legal significance of the environment. So let's start about with an introduction about the juridical aspect of the environment, which is a quite recent concept. So when it comes to assessing the legal significance of the environment, we encounter two main difficulties. The first one is the fact that the interest for the environment actually overlaps many sectors, so it is not sector specific, and therefore it is more difficult to define the environment as a very strict concept. And second, the second difficulty is the territorial closeness among the territory that produces an environmental impact and the organization that manage that specific territory. So during the years, the many countries have adopted the not in my backyard approach, meaning that the territorial level where the causes were produced often rather don't have the tools to control the effect, or they are just not interested in making other countries deal with the effects and cost of the negative impacts. And this kind of approach explains the strong supranational connotation of the environmental laws. So the importance of defining the environment as a specific subject derives from the fact that it is important in order to study the environment as a subject of rights. So on an European level, actually from the 80s, there were only sector-specific law, and in Italy, the first environmental related law was in 1966, and for instance, it was against atmospheric pollution. So let's take a look at the Italian context. Basically, the reason why the environment gained attention at the beginning was the increase of the pollution in many sectors, and basically it didn't find any adequate solution in the already existing organization. There were just some associations at the beginning for the protection of the environment, but not an official referent institution. Instead, in 1986, it was instituted the Ministry of the Environment, which was the referent institution for the subject of the environment, and it was of fundamental importance because it assured the presence of a unique center that was the referent institution for the environment. Therefore, it brought to the conclusion that the environment itself is a subject, even though it maintains its transversal nature, but it was a fundamental step in the environmental law for Italy. So let's take a deeper look on the birth and evolution of the environmental law on a global and European and Italian level. So internationally, as we said, the environmental law was firstly formed on a supranational level because it was acknowledged that no country had the right to utilize its own territory in a way that could harm other countries. So the first important step was the United Nations Conference on the Human Environment in Stockholm in 1972. A question was raised: is it possible to set a limit for the development considered the limited resources of the Earth? And is it possible to preserve the quality of life of the present generation and of the future ones? So the principle of the Declaration of Stockholm represented the beginning of the acknowledgement on a global level of the existence of the environmental problem, and also the sharing of a system of values. Another important step was the Brundtland Report in 1986, where it was internationally defined the concept of sustainable development for the first time. And sustainable development was defined as a kind of development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So it was quite popular and broadly applied, mainly because it was still quite a general concept and not strictly quantitative. And also in this was an important step to clearly define the interdependence of nations and a shared system of value of the different nations. So another important step is the famous Rio de Janeiro Earth Summit, in which it was clarified that also the concept that the oh, sorry, I'm reading a question. Is it possible to ask question to, okay. Yes, you can ask. I'm going to take a break after the first 20 minutes of presentation of 5 minutes in which you can ask me some questions and you can take a break, and then we will do the second 20 minutes. Okay, so I'll continue with the presentation. So I was saying the Rio de Janeiro summit, where it was clarified also that the developed countries have the duty to spend a bigger effort in order to obtain a sustainable development, both for historical reasons and for the technologies that they have access to. Another important step was the Rio de Janeiro, yes, I was talking about the Rio de Janeiro summit. Yes, another important principle that was expressed was the precautionary principle, which set the basis for the development of actually more specific environmental law, both on a global and national level. So the precautionary principle was important because it set the passage from the concept of burden of proof to the concept of risk, and it actually declares that the prevention of harmful events has to not wait until the certainty of their occurrence. Also, it was declared the polluter pays principle. So basically, as the name says, the fact that polluter has to cover the cost of his own pollution, and this is this could actually at the time be a concept that could be misunderstood, because at the beginning some countries interpreted it as you may have the right to pollute if paying. So it had to be more specified on a national level. Also, the Rio de Janeiro Earth Summit produced 3 important documents. Probably the most important one on a global level was the Agenda 21, because the Agenda 21 built the foundation for the important changes that would be introduced in the 21st century. Because it actually all gave many important tools on a global level, but it also gave important tools to apply it on a local level, as recommended by Chapter 28. And it was important because of its local character, meaning that it focused also on the bottom-up choices and action, and it highlighted the importance of the participatory process. So not just top-down, but also a shared system of values with the citizens. A few conferences of regional European nature has to be mentioned, such as the Geneva Convention on Long-Range Transboundary Air Pollution, the Convention on Environmental Impact Assessment in a Transboundary Context, informally called the ISPO Convention, the Aarhus Convention, and of course the Kyoto Protocol. So the Kyoto Protocol pointed out the importance of reducing the greenhouse emission, and also it was of fundamental importance because it pointed out the relation among the market and the environment, declaring that in order to protect the environment, the world had to decrease its freedom of trade. So let's take a deeper look into the European context on the European level. So the first measure on an environmental sector were not very strict, and they were in form of directives and regulations. Today, the protection of the environment can be found in the Treaty on European Union in the Articles 2, 3, 6, and 174, and which these articles highlight some principles of sustainable development, which we are going to see, and this principle set the fundamentals for the national laws that came afterwards. So these important principles were 5. The first one was the precautionary principle. So the precautionary principle, which can be translated with better safe than sorry, meaning that when the country has to adopt the strategy of applying a measure, even though there is no certainty of an environmental risk, and it enhanced the application of the cost-benefit analysis implementation. The second principle is the polluter pays principle, and it was particularly important because it set the individual responsibilities both for the countries and for the juridical individuals, and it introduced taxes and charges for environmental harm. The third one is the prevention principle, that can be summarized with the sentence better preventing that cleaning up, and it is received with the Italian via in Italy. Then we have the environmental damage should be rectified at source principle that pretty much explains itself, and it means that the damages have to be dealt when they occur. So meaning from the first individual that causes them, the first country that causes them. And last but not least, the integration principle, which which brings an holistic point of view and an holistic approach, meaning that all the policies in the different fields should have common objective of sustainable development, so that the environment should be taken into account when dealing with policies at any level. So not just when talking about environmental sector specific policies, but also economic, social, cultural policies should take the environment into consideration. Let's take a look into an introduction about the Italian context, and then we can proceed with the first break. So in Italy, it was only in 2004 that the parliament delegated the government to the adoption of the environmental code, Codice dell'Ambiente, which is composed of 6 parts and in 5 chapters. So it sets the first part sets the procedures for the strategic environmental assessment and the environmental impact assessment, so which in Italian are VAS and VIA, which we are going to take a deeper look on later. The second part is about soil protection, combating desertification, water protection, and water management. The third one is about waste management. The fourth is about the protection of the air and the reduction of atmospheric emission. And the fifth one is about environmental harm. Okay, so I am going to take a break at this point of 5 minutes so that you can go and take a glass of water or what you prefer, and if you want you can ask me a few questions about this first part. Thank you.
Okay, there is a question from Halim. Hello. The rules and regulations only focusing on developed countries. Is there any strategy to cover the developed countries as well?
So basically, the developing countries are taken into account more on an European level, because on an European normative point of view, rather than on an Italian national level, because both for historical reasons and for technological availability on an European level, it is declared that the developed countries have to spend a bigger effort in order to obtain a sustainable development on a global level. And this is quite a new recent concept that was first introduced in the Portland report in 1987. So it does exist, and it has a basis on an European level, not strictly on an Italian national level. I hope I answered to your question. So I was introducing the concept of environmental impact. Environmental impact is the basis of the environmental legislation in Italy and of future sustainable development. And it is defined as any qualitative or quantitative change to the environment intended as the system of relations among the anthropic, natural, chemical, physical, climatic, landscape, architecture, tonical, etc., as a consequence of the application on the territory of plans and programs or the realization of projects of facilities, public or private, and of their functioning. I read you this definition because it is important, since it is applied to the on an administrative level, in particular in VIA and VAS, which we are going to see in a few slides. It can be applied. It is applied in Italy with different kind of tools. In normative tools, for instance, with tools of prohibition or authorization, administrative tools such as planning tools on different level, on national, regional, or municipal level, with VIA and VAS, which, as I said before, in Europe there are the correspective of the translation of EIA and CEA on economical level, with taxes, incentive, disincentives, and on the market with the application of different kind of certification, which we all know as eco-label, etc. So let's take a look into VIA and VAS and their an application of environmental impact. So what is VIA? VIA is a technical administrative procedure that is applied to a specific construction, to a specific site. In Europe, there are two kinds of VIA. One is mandatory and is applied to higher risk works, and the list of these kind of works can be found in the Annex first of the directive, and the other one is the optional VIA, which can be asked for from the single countries for project with some specific characteristics. In Italy, instead, the VIA is applied to the works that have some respond to some specific criteria, and based on their specificity, dimension, and on the particular sensitivity of the site where the project of the works are applied. The objective of the VIA is to protect human health, to contribute with a better environment to the quality of life of human beings, to provide the maintenance of species, and to preserve the reproductive capacity of the ecosystem, as it is considered an essential resource of life. And what is the target of VIA? The object of the evaluation is, of course, the impact. Therefore, the importance of the environmental impact, and it can be managed on different levels, governmental, regional, or from CIPE, Comitato Interministeriale per la Programmazione Economica, which is an interministerial committee for economical programming, and it depends on its characteristics, and it is composed on many phases. So the first phase is the preliminary phase, which is composed of a phase, a sub-phase of screening, in which it is established if VR will be necessary, and a phase of scoping, in which there is a confrontation among the private and public sector, in which it is necessary to establish what to insert in it. The second phase is the conducting phase, in which the environmental impact assessment is presented, and its many components are presented as mandatory, such as description of the project and the different kind of technical data. Third one is the preparatory phase, which is needed from the administration in order to gather information to properly decide on whether give or not the permissions. Then the decisive phase, in which the VIA procedure is concluded with the adoption of an express and motivated measure of the Ministry Commission. And then the monitoring phase, which is the last one, but is actually of fundamental importance, because it takes into consideration for the possible negative impact. So it actually forecasts some possible negative impacts in the future, and it implies that the work does not finish when it is put into its site, but it has to be constantly monitored. Then we have another kind of administrative and important tool, which is VAS, that is the evaluation of the effect determined from plans and programs on the environment. So while what is the main difference between VIA and VAS? Basically, VIA was applied to specific projects of work for specific sites, while VAS is applied to plans and programs on the environment. The only sectors in which it cannot be applied are programs for national defense, civil protection, and financial programs. And the objective, of course, accords to the general objectives of sustainable development, and it has to assure that the plans and programs are coherent with its principles. And the target can be both governmental and regional. And on our governmental phase, the plans and programs has to be approved to the governmental body, and on a regional level, the plans and programs has to be approved from the local authorities. And it depends basically on the kind of tools which is applied. So if I am going to apply a municipal level, of course it will be more local, and if it is going to be on a wider territory, it is going to be regional or national. The VAS procedure also has a few phases which importance lays in their articulation. So it also has a preliminary phase in which it is established public consultation is particularly important and regional if confronted with other administrative tools, because it puts a light on the public participation, and it means that whoever wants to consult the VAS and present their own observation, they can, and they can give their opinion on it. Then there is a decisive phase and a monitoring phase. So the VIA-VAS relationship points out some common feature and some distinctive feature. As we said, they address they both address the environmental impacts as a part of the greater procedure. So they are important because they do not deal with environmental impacts as a sector separated from other activities. Instead, they are tools that are needs in order to develop a holistic discourse and to include it as a part of our transversal and multi-sectoral activities. And the main distinctive feature is the fact that in VIA, since it is for projects, in a phase of there is a phase in which the possibility of making a greater change is reduced, while instead in VAS, since it is for plants, it is more possible to be changed, and the changes that can be done accompanies the draft of the plan itself. So there are a few differences among VIA and VAS. So as I said, VAS action is more strategic, while VIA is about the specific construction for one specific project for one site, and the VIA is short term, being sector specific, being project specific, while the VAS is more on a medium long term. VIA is mainly quantitative, and its output can actually in some forms being measured, while VAS is mainly quantitative. VIA is for its characteristic more local, while VAS is more national, regional, and VIA is more strict because it is quantitative, while VAS being more qualitative is more strict and more uncertain, and its output are more general. And also, even though the public participation is actually included in the process of VAS, the public perception is more vague and distant, while in VIA the public is more reactive, because being more site-specific, in here as well we can assist to a not in my backyard approach. So the public often does not want or does want that some project are put into action, are put into works in some sites. And also there is a difference about the commission, because in VAS it is public, while in VIA it actually is also private. Okay, so as we come to the conclusion of the presentation, I would like to give a few examples of good practices in Italy, which show a virtuous application of the principles of the environmental law that we just saw. So one good practice is the Piano di assetto del territorio di Padova, which is an urban tool of the city of Padova in the north of Italy. And so this case is interesting because it shows the application of an urban tool in which it was proposed the realization of a green infrastructure with the goal to connect the urban environment with the rural environment. And so basically it is important because it also aims to enhance the principles of Agenda 21 for local sustainable development, because it connects the urban with non-urban area. Also, it was realized through a participatory process, which is a fundamental characteristic of VAS and is a concept that is gaining more and more importance on a national and international level, and which formed some guidelines for the implementation of the plan. And what is important in this process, what I consider virtuous, is the fact that the approach was not top-down, but was based on co-management between institutions and citizens. And in order to reach the goals of the plan, it was developed on three main actions. So the first one was the e-management of green urban spaces through technology. The second one, as I said, was the participation of the community in the decision-making of the process, and a very strict articulation of and planning of this participation. And the third important pilot action was the formation of new management tools that were considered as necessary in order to create models of transnational governance for sustainable management of green urban areas. Another virtuous tool is the good practice is the Piano Operativo della Città di Prato, which is another urban plan, more on a local level, on a communal plan of medium and long period planning, which had the objective of the definition of local sustainable development on many levels. So it enhances the principle of the Agenda 21 for local sustainable development, because and it also is current with the objective of the Agenda 21, because it has an integrated and holistic approach, because it takes into consideration social, cultural, economical, and the environmental point of view and different aspects. And it forecasts the reuse of the different components of the city, and it treats nature as a natural green infrastructure in order to connect in here as well the urban and the rural area. It focuses on soil consumption, and the reduction of soil consumption, on the resilience to climate changes, and on the maintenance of the ecological function of ecological soils and their production. And so the principles of keeping a high quality environment are in here as well, coherent with the principles of the Agenda 21, of the Brundtland report, and on the European environmental law, because it takes into account the importance of maintaining the good quality of the natural environment and urban environment for future generation, and the interconnectivity of different sectors. So these were two good practices that I would like to mention, and so I finished with this my presentation, and I thank you very much for your attention. And I would like to remind you that if you have any question, you can write me an email, which you can read at the bottom of this last slide. My email is julia.venati.92@gmail.com. Thank you very much for your attention, and if you have any question, feel free to ask.
Okay, I see some question. Looking to global environmental crisis, do the current efforts satisfiable? Even in developed countries, seem that we are still in the legislation stages.
Mhm. Yes, actually, it was the initial stage of the European uh, normative as well. At the beginning in Europe, the environmental law were very general and on one side, on one point of view, not very strict. And on the other point of view, they were sometimes instead too sector specific. So, in my opinion, on one hand, it is probably just a natural process for environmental law to become better and better with time, and it but on the other hand, it can actually probably just come into, they can just become better if there is an international collaboration worldwide. So I believe that also in developing countries, environmental law can become more effective, and only if there is a collaboration and an integration of the different national laws on a global level.
Halim say many thanks.
Thanks to you.